we're going to dive deep into overcoming the trauma of self-doubt today with none other than Yats Palat. Thank you so much for being here with us today and welcome to the show. It's so good to have you.
Absolutely. It's so awesome to be here. I'm glad we finally got to put this together. So thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
So we were scheduling this for quite a little bit between time differences and things going on in his life and in my life and in everything else. It finally happened. So we're here and we're ready to dive into this conversation. But before we get into the goodies that I know you're going to bring us and the tips and the suggestions, I want to know what drove you into this particular topic.
That's a great question. First, thank you for that introduction. That was stellar. I feel like I need to hire you anytime I go on conferences and stuff and be like, Gigi, go up before me. Let them know who I am. That was very flattering, but I appreciate everything that you said. Really, actually, I was talking to one of my employees today and I said that the greatest thing that has given me the knowledge to share this with people is experience. You asked me what it is that got me into this field, into this space. Truth be told, it was my own life, quote unquote, being fucked up in different spaces and going through certain levels of trauma, especially around relationships. In fact, there was one major relationship that rocked me on my ass like many, many years ago. And I went into a spot of depression. I wasn't able to function at work properly. And it was so interesting for me because my relationship life was suffering, but for some reason I couldn't function or focus on anything else. And so it got me to start thinking, why is it that a relationship is the basis and a trauma from the relationship is the basis of how I function everywhere? And I started to dig deeper and deeper. And as I started to understand, I realized it wasn't even the relationship, but how I attached to it, how I got stuck to it, what it meant to me, how I extract my identity from it. And that's when I realized that as human beings, we constantly seek validation, connection, and association in everything around us more than we do inside ourselves. And that's primarily because of how we were raised, our conditioning, our trauma, and everything else. So really, that's what first got me into this field, and learning how to become a better version of myself just got me to get better and better at it, enough so that I learned enough so I could teach people. So really, that's what it was.
I love that. I feel like we often find ourselves curious about helping others in the spaces in which we have at some point needed the most help. And it seems to me, I mean, that's definitely been my experience with myself and my space of coaching with mindset and overcoming the limiting beliefs that used to hold me back, my money mindsets, my relationship mindsets, and so many other spaces of mindset work. And I find that that is my most the area of coaching in which I'm most interested, because it's where I had to do the most healing and the most overcoming. And so I find every time I talk to coaches, I often ask, what made you dive into this particular space of coaching, in this particular space of helping others to grow? And I find that it comes usually from their own healing and their own space, right? It's never like, well, I'm going to do this just because it's going to help somebody else or just because it's going to help the world be a better place, but often because I know how much this hurts and I want to help others to overcome that pain as well. So I find that absolutely stunning. But can we start by defining trauma? Because I was mentioning in the intro how there is a misconception about trauma, right? And we often think of trauma just as that thing that is either because of abuse, right? Like physical or mental abuse, or like rape, or like or like a really terrible tragic car accident, or like these really big events that when you think that word trauma, you think like really large things, right? But there are other events in life that can also cause trauma that may not be categorized as traumatic for both. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you asked that question, because I have to answer this a lot to people when, I say, oh, these patterns came from your childhood and from like the subtle traumas that you absorbed. And they're like, but my childhood was perfect. Like I had nothing major or bad happen to me, like I don't have anything traumatic. And so then when I ask them what their definition of trauma is, it's this stereotyped definition that trauma means something crazy, abusive, heavy, or bad, something that was so impactful that I will remember. But the truth is actually trauma can be very, very subtle. In fact, and I like to give this example a lot, when you're a child and when you're born into this world, you don't actually have a developed forebrain. In fact, you're lacking most of your forebrain. So you have the reptilian brain, the brain that's just about, eating, breathing, pooping, all the stuff, emotions that a child needs to have. And so you don't know who you really are, which is what's amazing about babies and children, is that they don't know what color they are. They don't know what language they speak. They don't know where they're from. How they learn about themselves is how they're exposed to the world treating them. And so for these little children, if they exist in a world where love is held back, where validation is held back, unless the baby behaves like the parent, or the baby shows up in a way that the parent wants them to, or the child is, is performing for the parent in some way, shape, or form. If love is being held otherwise, the child starts to process these little things as subtle trauma. The child starts to think to themselves, I am not lovable just as I am, and therefore my parents or my family or someone's holding love back. They're not going to really understand, oh, my dad, was in the military or had trauma or was invalidated as a child, so he's doing the same to me. They're not going to understand any of that. They just process these things as making something mean about them. And so something even as subtle as if a mother has a whole bunch of children and she's holding one baby or child close to her chest, the baby feels so safe and complete. But let's say something happens. Let's say one of the other children throws a tantrum. Now, this mother suddenly diverts her attention onto this child and has to put down the child in her arms. And when she does that, this child who's in her arms, when he goes in the cradle or he's on the bed, he's suddenly thinking, why the hell is that guy or that girl worth more than I am? Like, what makes them crave and achieve the attention more than my parent does? And so unless the parent comes back and revalidates this child, that child processes this as a moment of invalidation trauma, as being invalidated and finding someone else more valuable than them. And so life now becomes this like subtle series of moments where this child growing into an adult saves these memories, saves these small little things in their subconscious to tell them that I have to keep proving myself, because if I don't, my loved one is going to leave me for someone else. My loved one's going to choose someone else. I have to throw a big tantrum, because if I don't make a big fight and a hoo-ha and have drama in my life, then that means I'm probably not going to get the attention. Somebody else will. So all of these little things stay with our conditioning, and they start determining how we create our relationships.
Yeah. And I can hear in the stories that are in the examples that you were sharing right now, how so many of these underlying traumatic experience are sometimes completely unknown to us, stuff that we don't think that we have an issue with, but it's not until we gained the awareness of our repeated behaviors that we understand that the underlying issue is in fact something that caused a trauma that is now guiding our decision making or our understanding of the world.